Welcome to the sixth Hospice Care of the Low Country webinar. My name is Debbie Lines. I'm going to be your moderator. Very excited to do this. We're very pleased to have you all join us for today's webinar. I love early birds. Today we're going to be speaking about grief, keeping your loved ones present. And it's really interesting. Hospice decided to offer this for the community because we know the holidays, especially this year with the pandemic, are very, very challenging. And many of us have had to shift up our traditions and even come up with new ones. And it's going to be challenging, I think, for all of us who can't celebrate our annual traditions due to social distancing, families and friends in other areas. We really hope that this is a practical seminar for all of you or webinar for all of you. And while we're waiting for other folks to join in, we want to get to know you all better. And so we thought we might ask you some questions and take a poll. I'd like to introduce you to my friend Janet Porter, who serves as the chair of the board for Hospice Care of the Low Country. Janet, hello.
Hello, Debbie. How are you?
I'm wonderful. It's always fun to be together. And as we always have a few minutes before we start, it's been interesting to really recognize how pertinent this webinar is today, as we all were sharing our own personal shifts and changes now.
Yes, I think we're all hearing on the media, but also I'm sure all of our listeners today are talking to friends about what their plans are for the holidays. And I certainly have found that my friends around the country, particularly in areas of the country that are much harder hit with COVID, are either still not sure what they're doing for the holidays, for Thanksgiving specifically, or I'm finding that a lot of them are alone. Even some of my single friends are just eating alone rather than even going, down the street to neighbors. So it's a challenging time for us.
It's really interesting. Janet, I think you all have done a beautiful thing by asking questions of our audience so we can get to know what their thoughts are on the holidays. And I know we're going to focus these questions today. We're going to focus the first one on whether or not your past traditions will be honored this year, which is really interesting. So, shall we do a first question?
Sure.
All right. Here's our first question, and we're going to ask you to simply answer yes or no. And the question is, are you able to celebrate your usual Thanksgiving this year?
So, Debbie, just as a reminder, if anybody's new joining, all you have to do is move your cursor up to yes, no, or don't know yet, and it'll record your response. And I'm the moderator, so I'll get to see everyone's response.
Oh, you
So
got the
I
fun
think
stuff.
I think we have most of our people responding.
Okay.
So 2/3 of our audience have said no, Debbie,
Wow.
that they're not, and a third have said yes. And that is actually in keeping with what I saw as a national poll,
Okay.
that most people are saying that they're not going to be following their traditions, which I think is what we would all expect, because people aren't traveling to see their parents and grandparents and siblings like they normally would.
I think our gratefulness and our Thanksgiving is going to be reflected a bit differently. We'll be grateful for Zoom calls now.
Yes, and in response to getting after we practiced, and I don't know if everybody knows that we do a dress rehearsal and practice on this before. Our practice made me think that I needed to reach out to single friends.
Oh,
So I've reached out to 3 different single friends, 2 of whom are widowed, and set up Zoom calls for the morning of Thanksgiving with them.
oh my gosh.
And I was inspired based on our conversation earlier. So I think today we may find that people who have plans for the holidays and are safe with it, this hopefully we might inspire others to reach out to those who aren't so fortunate and really are alone this year.
That is beautifully said. And again, welcome to Hospice Care. This is our webinar number 6. And this is on grief, keeping your loved ones present. And I've noticed how the webinar has shifted and is so apropos for today in the pandemic. And we want to know more about you all before the actual webinar begins. So we've got some questions that we're asking. We just asked one question. Janet, we're going to ask one more question. And once Thanksgiving passes, are you able to have your usual Christmas, Hanukkah, or personal celebration this year? Again, Janet's really good. Answer yes, no, or don't know. Just use your cursor, move up or down to answer that question. We'll give you about 10 seconds to respond.
I think so. I think our attendees today, Debbie, have been with us before because they've all responded so quickly.
There
So,
you go.
so
We're all
75,
pros now.
yeah, we're pros with this Zoom thing. So 75% of the people are saying no, that they're not able to have their usual Christmas or Hanukkah. And the remaining 25% are saying they don't know yet. So no one in our audience today is able to say they're having their usual Christmas or Hanukkah.
So I think we all have to be a little bit adaptable this year.
And Debbie, it's interesting when we decided to plan this webinar, it's called Grief Keeping Your Loved Ones Present, because we think about grieving as grieving the loss of a loved one, but we also grieve the loss of past traditions, of things that are usual to us. Our regular vacation spot. That we can't go to and take the annual family photo. I mean, we grieve those things that are precious to us, not just individuals, but those traditions that mean so much. And so today we're going to have staff from the hospice who are experts in helping people cope with grieving, to give you some tips about how to do well this year.
And I think one of the things that's been so important that I've learned through these webinars is that talking about things and opening up discussions, which is really big for you, Janet, really helps people process and get through these tough times. And you recognize that we all are very similar in that we all have, this is a time of change for everyone. Not one of us is exempt.
Yes, yes. And I think so much of coping is being in touch with your feelings and acknowledge them. Of course, Barbara Scobie, who's our expert, is going to be talking more about this once we start the webinar. So she's really the expert that I should defer to you. And I should defer to you. You have a PhD in psychology.
There
So
you go.
both of you know more about this than I do. But so much of coping effectively with feelings, we do know, is about acknowledging it and not kind of bottling it up. So we're going to talk about that today also. And Debbie, with your expertise more than any of the other webinars, first of all, thank you so much for volunteering to do all of these for us. We haven't really, acknowledged your incredible contribution to the hospice care of the Low Country over the last 6 months if you've done these webinars, and you've been so fabulous. But feel free to join in and be more aggressive today, because this really is up your alley.
Well, I really appreciate doing it. Frankly, I've learned more than anyone. And so I've been really grateful. Like, this, I've got a copious set of notes that I've taken from all these webinars. So it's really good.
Yeah.
I'd like to say hello again to everyone. I am Dr. Debbie Lyons, your moderator. This is Janet Porter. She is the chairperson of Hospice Care of the Low Country. And we'd like to welcome all of you to our can you believe it, sixth webinar. And this one is coping with grief during the holidays, keeping your loved ones present. I am really excited to participate in this. And we've got a third question for everyone right now. Janet, if you'd like to put that up there. This is a broad spectrum question, right? How are you feeling about all of the holidays this year? The same as in years past? More sadder than in years past, or more appreciative and cheerful than in years past? Or frankly, you don't know. Please take a couple of moments to answer that. Wow, that's a thoughtful question. I don't know where to put my cursor, Janet.
Yes, and just to remind people again, what you do on these polls is you do just put your cursor up on the question on the screen, and because we have a couple people who haven't responded yet, and it'll click, your response will be corrected. So just put your cursor by whether you don't know, you're more appreciative, you're sadder, or feeling the same, and and your response will be recorded. So Debbie, let me give you the results.
Okay.
We have 67% of the people who've responded have said that they're actually 57% now, because I just ended the poll. Thank you for that other person who responded. 57% have said they're sadder than in years past, and 43% said they're more appreciative and cheerful than in years past. So kind of a split. No one says they feel the same as in years past. And
Yeah.
how could you? How could you, right? Um,
It's
uh,
almost bittersweet.
Yes, it is, because I think so many of us, with so much loss for so many people in the country, loss of jobs, loss of loved ones,
Mhm.
loss of being able to see your relatives. I think so many of us are so appreciative of what we do have, and so grateful that, particularly in the low country, that we've been spared the real devastation that in the rest of the country. So I can appreciate people saying they're more appreciative and cheerful. But you can also appreciate people feeling sadder because those traditions aren't going to be honored. And hopefully people will get some sense of tips and solace from our discussion today, Debbie.
And I totally agree with that. I think it's fascinating, and I think we're so fortunate to even be able to have this webinar to connect with each other, because it's really all about connecting. It's all about feeling isolation's not a great thing. We need to feel connected. So I'm very grateful, Janet. I really am.
Yes, as I've talked to friends, every friend I talk to, I'm more conscious of one more friend I
Yes.
should reach out to, and one more friend I should reach out to. And what we know about coping is that one of the best ways to cope is to reach out to others and
Correct.
connect, even though we don't feel like it. Even that, taking that initiative and doing for others is the one of the top ways people say to get yourself out of your own sadder feelings, is to
And
think
I
about others and do for others.
exactly, we're talking about psychology, and I think it's called opposite to urge. Oftentimes when you feel like pulling the covers over your head, that is, you're exactly right. That is the time to reach out to friends and family. It was interesting, and I'll just say this really quickly. I had a woman that I sat on a board with about 12 years ago, and she's living in Charleston right now. And she is going through her old telephone book, her address book, and reaching out to people she hasn't talked to in years. And she called and reached out and, how is your daughter, Debbie, who was 5? I said, well, she has 2 children and she's, but it was really, really fun to reconnect like that. So that was just kind of a creative idea.
Well, what I did is I don't usually do this early, but I went and got my Christmas cards printed and made the biggest order I've ever done,
Smart.
because I want to send more Christmas cards this year than ever before. I realized most of our audience don't do that. Everybody keeps track of each other on Facebook. But, in the old days, when you and I were doing
Yeah.
holidays, instead of Facebook, we had this thing called Christmas cards.
Yes, I love
Right.
my Christmas card.
So I'm sending more Christmas cards to more people than ever this year, just because it's a way to reach out and say, I'm thinking of you.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, are we ready? Just about ready to get this going here?
Yes, and you might want to ask people to chat in, Debbie,
Okay.
if they have any suggestions for others. And you just go to the toolbar and put your chat function in. And please, if you chat in right now, your chat will go and will be seen by everyone. All panelists and all attendees can see anything anybody writes. So anything you want to write that's a message to others or a tip, please do that, because this is what they say in roller skating, this is an all skate.
Oh, I like that. And
This is
all,
an all skate. Right.
well
Okay.
said.
So thank you, Debbie. I'll see you in
All
a
right.
few minutes.
All right. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to Hospice Care of the Low Country's 6th annual care planning webinar. Once again, my name is Dr. Debbie Lyons, and I'm going to be your moderator. Today's webinar is called Grief, Keeping Your Loved Ones Present. It's been fascinating. Hospice decided to present this webinar to the Low Country because the holidays are going to be challenging, and we just saw that with the direct reflection from folks in our audience today and the polls and the questions that were asked. And even though holidays can be challenging at best every year, this year is going to present um, even more challenges to folks. People can grieve and become depressed over so much of what they've lost during this time, and especially with COVID, family, friends, even the ability to connect with others. Routines are completely different right now. So I feel very fortunate that we're going to have this webinar. Our guests today are going to be especially helpful and informative. And their goal, I think, is to provide some specific tools and techniques for all of us to take away. And they're very uplifting in the way that they speak. We're going to have today Barbara Scobie, who is the bereavement coordinator, if I can say that correctly, for Hospice Care of the Low Country, and Charlie Tyler, Chaplain Charlie, as he's well known. He's the spiritual coordinator for Hospice Care of the Low Country. So we are thrilled to have them. And we've had a little sneak peek and chatted with them before. I think you'll be amazed at the information that they have. Um, just as a matter of housekeeping, for those of you, if this is your first Zoom, let me explain a little bit about how it works at the bottom of your screen. There is a toolbar, and that toolbar, you can move the cursor, and there's an icon that says chat. We're very interactive and inclusive in this, and feel free to chat at any point in time. Panelists and other audience members will be able to um, work along with your chat and see what we're talking about. Darlene Schutz is here from Hospice Care of the Low Country. She's going to respond to your questions. She's sort of the anchor and the conduit and liaison so that we make sure we get everything answered. If you think of a question you do have specific, don't hesitate to use that chat panel. I'd like to go ahead, if I may, do that and say this. We're going to introduce Darlene in just a moment. What I would also like to do is make sure that you give us feedback. Feedback helps guide these webinars and is an important tool for all of us at Hospice Care of the Low Country, so we know what your needs are. So without further ado, Darlene, Hospice Care of the Low Country has supported patients and families for 38 years, and an integral part of this is the marketing and community relations. I'd like to introduce you, please, to Darlene Schutz, Hospice Care of the Low Country. Darlene?
Hey, Deb, how are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so much. At Hospice Care of the Low Country, we've been here for 38 years and we care for patients and families at end of life, physically, emotionally, spiritually. A lot of people don't know that we also provide bereavement support services, which are free of charge to anyone in the Low Country, whether their loved one was a patient with Hospice Care of the Low Country or not. And what we're seeing locally, and I'm sure nationally, is that the rates of depression and even suicide have increased over the last 7 months due to COVID. And coupled with the holidays, this can be a really challenging time for people. So we thought this would be a wonderful way to reach out, give support, let you see the expertise of our fabulous team, and offer this practical webinar on a way to celebrate perhaps this year in a very different way and keep the spirits of those you love. So we are reminding you that you can view past webinars, which are on our website. I will be posting the link regularly through this in the chat room. There's resources available that Barbara and Charlie will be mentioning today. So we are so thrilled that you're here. Thank you so much. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Janet Porter, who is the chair of the Hospice Care of the Low Country Board. Janet?
Thank you, Darlene. And I want to acknowledge Darlene because she has been the genesis of actually this webinar today. She's really in charge of community relations for the hospice, and she's the one that really mentioned a couple months ago that we were seeing higher rates of depression and suicide, specifically in Beaufort County and Hilton Head and in Bluffton, and thought that this webinar would be a good idea today. And she will also be monitoring the chat. And for those of you, again, who haven't chatted before, just put your cursor down on your toolbar and you can go to the chat, and any questions you have for Barbara or Charlie, let me know. And we'll get those, I'll try to get those asked for you and then answered. And you can also send in suggestions, and we have it set up so everybody can see everyone's comments. In thinking about the holidays, one of the things that we practice in advance for webinars. And so we practiced last week, and that practice session got me motivated to think about reaching out to others. So I've set up 3 Zoom meetings on the morning of Thanksgiving with 3 of my friends that are single. 2 of them are widowed, and who I realize are alone for the holidays, and for whom it will mean a lot to have someone reach out to them on Thanksgiving. And but I've also been in touch with other people, just checking in on them. And one of my friends, who is very fun, um, ordered the cardboard cutouts that you see in the stands at football games. One of my friends calls those flat people, where you send in a photo and they make a cardboard cutout for you. And he's going to have them set up right at the dining room table of their 6 children and grandchildren, 6 family members that aren't there. And they're going to use them both at Christmas and at Thanksgiving, so that they don't feel like they're eating alone. They're also Zooming with those people. But of all the ideas I've heard about how to cope with the holidays, that was the one that I thought was most creative way to make sure you feel connected. And as this webinar is, we titled it, keeping your loved ones present. And my friend who did this for his wife said that what they're going to do is go around and tell their favorite story about each of those individuals, those children and grandchildren, over Thanksgiving, and then do the same thing at Christmas. So Barbara and Charlie are going to give us a lot of great tips today, but that's my tip of the day that you might think about. So what I first want to do is introduce you to Barbara Scobie. So Barbara is been with hospice care for about 4 years, but she worked in hospice care for 11 years before she joined us. And we're so glad to have her. And she is our coordinator of bereavement services. And so Barbara, welcome.
Thank you, Janet. It's such a privilege to be here. As we've talked about, so many of us, we're all experiencing this for the first time. We're all in it together, not only experiencing grief, but the change in our holidays and our everyday life, especially experiencing this pandemic fatigue that's affecting all of us.
Yes. So Barbara, we met a couple months ago with the audience when we had one specifically on bereavement and our bereavement services. But today we're just talking about grief in general, grief in terms of loss of loved ones, yes, but also grief in terms of loss of past traditions, loss of seeing, grandchildren and children and siblings and parents that we love. So I'm going to ask you, this may be repetitive for those of who are favorite viewers of our webinars, but I'm going to ask you again today to talk a little bit about your background beyond how I introduced you.
Okay, sure. Well, I have a sociology degree with a minor in social work. And so when I came out of school, I went straight into government work. I worked in child protective services, adult protective services. I investigated and eventually became a supervisor for those programs, as well as foster care and adoption, and was really satisfied in staying in that career. And during that, I was on the board of several groups, child fatality review. We had an interagency board. And so all of that was, the helping profession. And it was to figure out how we could correct problems or things that were going on in the community. But while I was doing that, I went back and got my master's degree in social work. And then my grandfather, very close to my family, my grandparents have always really promoted family is number one, staying in touch with family and carrying on traditions. My grandfather was diagnosed with lung cancer. And so in 2005, I took a leave of absence for 9 months to stay with him during the day. My mother stayed at night. And the experience was just overwhelming. I had been a caretaker for my grandmother, but not to the extent of really learning about someone going through the end of life stages. And he really was open and sharing that and talking about the quality of life. And during that process, we had hospice come in. My mother was also a hospice nurse. and social worker. And I didn't really know what she did at that time. I knew she was a hospice nurse, but until it really touched me personally, I just wasn't aware. And when the services came in, it was just such a wonderful experience to have that support. If you can say, you don't want to say a pleasant experience with hospice, but it really just changed how I felt about social work, and not only connecting with the patient, but being able to support the family, and also being able to support the family after the loss. Because for a lot of us, when you lose that loved one, then your team is dispersed and you feel alone, because not only are you without your loved one, you're without the team that helped get you through. So I really realized the significance of hospice and bereavement at that point. So I did not go back to state work. I came to hospice work and have done hospice social worker and bereavement coordinator for the last 15 years. And as you said, the last 4 with hospice care of the Low Country.
So Barbara, what an incredible background you bring to us, and how tender it is that you can relate to your patients so much based on what you went through with your own with what you've gone through with your own grandparents. So um, let's just start and jump right into the topic at hand, which is, what are some of the coping mechanisms that you would recommend for people as they cope with holidays that are different? We learned, for those of you who just joined us, we did polling before, and we learned that about 2/3 to 75% of the people on our webinar today are saying that they're not going to be having the usual Thanksgiving, and no one reported having the usual Christmas or Hanukkah. So lots of different behaviors this year, different ways to celebrate. So talk about what you would recommend as people cope with things being different this year.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think the first thing is to as Debbie discussed it, we don't want to isolate. When we're grieving, it's important to have those alone times. And even with the pandemic, to kind of sit in our grief and really be aware of what it is, but to move forward. And so I think planning and really trying to celebrate, figure out a way to celebrate. And it is unfortunate for most all of us are probably not going to be present together. As we know, the numbers are rising with COVID, and we're going to have college students coming home. You're going to have people that will be there. So that's a different challenge as we look at the holidays. But I think the main thing is you want to celebrate your loved ones, and you want to celebrate the ones here. And even without being able to be physically present, it's kind of a blessing that we do have the technology that we have now to be able to Zoom and FaceTime and Skype and all these different things that we have and that we're continuing to learn about. I know it's been, a challenge for, like my parents. I don't want to have to do that, but once they get on there and they see you, it makes such a impact. And as we know, the lack of touch is really, I think affecting so many people, because we're used to having that touch and those hormones, dopamine and serotonin, when we touch somebody and hug someone, come out and they make us feel better. And when we're not touched, our brain can lack that. It can really increase our depression and sadness. So we want to figure out ways to be able to be together, whether that's through Zoom or, telephone calls, and even creating some kind of, maybe symbol when our support groups meet together. Again, my family would come from a bunch of huggers. My grandfather kissed us on the mouth every time he saw us, and that's like the only person in the world that I were ever allowed to do that. But that's what my grandfather did. So when we have our groups, we have a big group hug. And so now that we're doing them on Zoom, everybody expresses how they miss that. And especially people who are alone. So, we've created different signals like a heart or just a hug. And so they may not be an actual physical thing that's occurring, but it reminds us that it is there, and it reminds us that that will happen again.
You know, the other thing, Barbara, that makes me think about it is humor and how
Mhm.
much humor can make a difference. I recently got a picture of, you have to picture this, of, it was just a photograph of two people jumping off a dock, but naked, totally naked, stark naked from the back, but they were like in their 80s, holding hands, two old people naked, jumping off the dock like, teenagers would do. And the caption was just enjoy life. And I sent that to everybody I knew because the minute you see this picture, it just made you laugh and brought a smile on your face. And I got so many responses from people who said, thank you just for making me laugh. So I think another suggestion might be to think about what you can do to really think about a really humorous story, for example, that you want to tell about that person before you get on the phone with them, that helps them to reminisce a great time. And that, hugging you miss a lot, but you can get a lot from reminiscing together, can't you?
Mhm. Yes, I think that's very important. And one of the things we did, we're still looking at our holidays. We're not sure what they're going to look like this year because of COVID and because of, elderly family members. We're used to getting together, but, even in the group, sometimes when people join, we talk about there are a lot of tears, but there's a lot of laughter because we want to be able to remember those happy times. And one of the things my uncle did, and this was a couple of years ago, but I was thinking about how we could kind of use it during our holidays this year. My grandfather was, I guess at the time you considered it a franchise. He was a milkman, but he had his own trucks and three sons that worked for him. And so my uncle made these cards and he said, wisdom that I learned from the milkman, because my grandfather would tell you anything whether you wanted to hear it or not. But again, he sent them all to the family. And so we wrote down, things we learned from him and happy, funny things that we did with him. And so we keep them. And so I think that's very important. And you were talking about earlier, your friends and cutting out the dolls. I think that's a great, the people, actual people cutting them.
Yeah.
And we've talked about cards. Another thing that I've done it several of my friends since they've been working from home, and they're trying to clear out their homes. They're trying to just get through this malaise of the pandemic and all the changes. They've gone through old pictures, and so they're clearing out some of their clutter. Number one, but they're also remembering good memories and they're sharing them. So they're making little photo albums for all of us. These are like friends for 40 years, over 40 years. And then they're sending them to us. So I got these, hard looking pictures of myself from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But it was really neat to reminisce and to remind ourselves again that we're in this together.
That reminds me, my sister is doing the decluttering, which so many of us are doing during COVID. And part of her decluttering was going through old photos and actually old videos.
Mhm.
And I actually met up with my sisters about 2 months ago, and we looked at videos of my mother as a child. I had an uncle who had money in the family. Nobody else had money. And he evidently, so this would have been literally like 1930. He had a movie camera, if you can imagine. And
Wow.
I'd never seen these videos of my mother as a child. And we stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning watching them.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I think you're right about old photos and old videos. What a wonderful way to bond with people and laugh and remember. That's a great suggestion, Barbara. And so what are some other things that you think might help people on the day? Because Thanksgiving and Christmas and Hanukkah are really a season, but we put a lot of stock in that day, getting up and what are we going to do that day? And so, any tips for what people do that day, particularly if they're alone this year, in terms of not seeming an interminable time where people are then lonely? Any tips?
Right. And I think again, it's important to try and plan for that day. We do not know what that day is going to look like until it gets here. We can plan the best that we can, and we don't know till we're in the moment. But again, I think trying to plan a way to celebrate, because the memories, that's what keeps our loved ones present, by sharing memories. But as you talked about, there are many people that are single or by themselves, and they may not have contact with people for a week, or for several weeks. And I think, plan that day, reach out to those who are alone, and share how you're feeling. I think communication is the main key for us during this time, to be able to really share our thoughts and feelings with our family and friends. Um, One thing that I have advised some people that's been helpful is, when you are at Thanksgiving or even Christmas, if you do have a sit down dinner, even if you're by yourself, and you've lost someone, to set a place for them, at the table, put a picture there, and really try and celebrate their life and remember the good memories. And as we remember those good memories, in time, they overtake the sadness and the sorrow that we feel. So I think a lot of it is just planning and reaching out to others. When we do for others and we're grateful in that moment, you can't be sorrowful as well.
Barbara, that's so true. Everything that I've read about just coping with COVID in general, not specifically for the holidays, but in general, talks about how helpful it is if you're reaching out to others and thinking of others and doing for others and getting beyond where you are, as a way to get up and have purpose in the day.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but if I didn't have purpose in my day, I'd stay in bed and read all day, which isn't a bad, bad way to spend a day. But I think that deliberateness about
Mhm.
thinking of others in your life who you want to reach out to can make all the difference. Um, and so, Barbara, how are you going to be celebrating the Thanksgiving, for example, this year? Have you figured that out?
Well, it's still kind of up in the air. My parents, of course, my father's had some health issues, so we're very careful not to go around him. But my mom would like for us to be present. So we've talked about meeting outside, and having two people at tables 6 feet apart, and everybody bringing their own meals, so the food's not connected. So I'm not sure if we'll do that. That's kind of up in the air. But for, the Christmas before is when my grandparents, the weekend before Christmas, again, my grandparents were very big on family. So my aunt has taken on the responsibility of kind of having everyone there. But there's like 40 of us, and we're all in different states. So we know that is not safe to do this year. But one of the things we're going to do is, we're going to just buy like a $20 gift, send it to everyone so they will have something to open. And we've talked about it being something that's significant to them, um, from our past. And the other thing is, a good idea we've thought about is, when my grandfather was aging, and my grandmother, I put up their Christmas trees. I got so tired of putting up Christmas trees, because I was putting up everybody's Christmas trees, then my own. So we finally made just a little Christmas tree for my grandfather that had little bears, and it had all of the grandchildren's names on it. And so we still pull that out, and then we add to it, because there's a lot more children that have been added. So even, small things like buying a Christmas ornament, and it being significant to the loss of your loved one, like if they were a cook or they like to travel, buying, a little suitcase decoration. There's so many different things that we can do. So we're still kind of up in the air, but we are going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate the ones that we've lost, as well as celebrate, even though we're not together, we're all safe right now. And we know that this is temporary. It's been a long process, but everything is temporary. And I think the other thing that's important, not only for me, but for everyone, if we look back over our lives, we've all had trauma, we've all had difficult experiences, and we can use that to base how we respond to this because we survived those times and we will survive this too. But we've all got to do it together, even though we're not physically together.
Barbara, thank you so much for your wisdom. You're absolutely right with your closing thought about thinking about the fact that of what holiday hopefully we'll be able to have next year, and
Mhm.
keeping people safe this year so that we can all celebrate together next year. It'll be delayed gratification, but thank you so much, Barbara, not just for being on the webinar today, but for everything you do for patients and families. And Barbara, I want to acknowledge that, you know, you provide support to patients and families all throughout, people all throughout our service area, whether they've been patients with us or not. So, you know, those of you who are on, you've had a chance to meet Barbara, please check into Hospice Care of the Low Country and find out about the bereavement support groups that are ongoing, keep going over Zoom and over telephones, because Barbara's a tremendous support to anyone who's grieving. So thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Janet. And I know Darlene is putting up the information for the support groups. And it truly is about 50% of our patients' families and 50% of community. So we invite you all. And one last thing, just to know, hope. I think for all of us to have hope, to know that things will get better and to believe that. So thank you so much, Janet.
Thank you, Barb. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Charlie Tyler. And Charlie Tyler is our spiritual coordinator. We laugh because we don't call Charlie the chaplain because you know that would be too confusing. So he goes by the title of spiritual advisor. How are you today, Charlie?
I'm good, Janet. Thank you. I've been so tempted to get a bowler hat and a cane just so that I can start making my visits looking like Charlie Chaplin.
Have you? So Charlie, you're such a resource for our patients and families, similar to Barbara. But could you just remind people what your background is before we delve into your thoughts this year, particularly about spiritual connectivity?
Yeah, Janet, thank you. Just a quick overview. I'm a native of Clearwater, Florida. Moved around a good bit. My father was always looking for better jobs, and then became a wholesale retailer for a large menswear company and moved him from territory to territory. But my homes, I called cities like Greensboro, North Carolina, home. Cincinnati, Ohio is where I went through junior high, high school, first year of college. And it was in Cincinnati that my mother unexpectedly died suddenly early in December. And I mention that now because I found myself floundering in my years afterwards. It was the early 70s. You didn't have access to a lot of counselors or anyone to tell you what's going on. So my sister and I really were upended during that time. One of the things that I discovered, and this began to inform me through the 30 years of ministry. I have a master's degree in divinity from Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi, served as senior pastor for about 32 years before I decided to pursue a career in hospice. But one of the things I discovered is that as Christmas began to come the next year, that instead of looking forward to the Christmas season or to Thanksgiving season, those were only triggers to remind me that I had lost someone very important to me. So the holidays lost their joy for a period of time. And Barbara's right, it does take a time to begin to get past that. You will get past that. I did get past that. But however, every December 6th, I'm aware of it, and my sister and I talk about that and how that completely upended our family at that time. So that's sort of me in a nutshell. And I love what I do and the people I do it with, and working with Barbara is a joy and a thrill. And she's taught me so much, and the support groups have taught me so much. Just to sit and listen in the corner has been an honor.
You know, Charlie, that's happened. That experience of a death close to the holidays has been true so far. Many of us, I shared earlier that my mother died on December 24th. And, but, you know, so we always at Christmas are thinking about my mom. We would be thinking about her otherwise, but we spent December 24th telling funny stories about my mom, and there are plenty to tell. and laughing with my sisters. And you know what it does is it reinforces for me how lucky I am to have sisters and siblings where I can reminisce and share those joys. So during this time, Charlie, you're helpful to people in our support groups. Um, and during this time, people also can tend to have real spiritual crises when they think about all the losses they're suffering for the holidays. So talk about what recommendations you would give for people to cope with that and getting and honoring their spiritual traditions during this time.
Yeah, and I think Barbara really hit the nail on the head too, just as she was concluding. Is just we do remind our people that this is not permanent. This is going to pass. We'll get through this. We really need to take care of ourselves on the way there. But as far as people's spiritual lives, as much as they're able to keep the symbolism intact, whatever your faith background is, to keep those symbols intact this year and look forward to next year. One of the other things too that we encourage our support group to do is to normalize the loss. And by that, the best way to normalize the loss is by talking about that loved one and encouraging others to talk about that loved one, because nobody really knows what to do. If I bring it up, is he going to be sad? Was she going to feel bad? I don't want to hurt her feelings, you know. So we dance around the gorilla that's in the room. And I think for those of us who have had losses, what really is an empowering thing during the holidays is to say, tell me about her, tell me about him, tell me stories about my loved one, so I can have that person living again with me in memories. That's a very powerful tool that normalizes the loss. And it also helps to stabilize the conversation and the environment, whether it's on the phone or Zoom or in person, because that person now knows that it's okay to talk about that loved one who's no longer there. It's okay to bring that up rather than being fearful that you might wound that person. And of course, one of the worst things or the hardest things is when that loved one's name is never mentioned again. And we see that from time to time. And that's a very difficult journey to make. And it's sad when that happens. But sometimes we try and encourage our support group members to be as verbal about that individual as they can.
You know, Charlie, the other thing that you're doing when you do that is you're investing in the next generation, knowing about past generations. For example, my great nieces do not know my parents, because my parents had both passed away. They would be their great grandparents by the time they died. But they talk about my mom and dad as if they knew them. You know, Sydney and Avery both, because we've told so many stories, and they even they're 5 and 8, and sometimes they'll even talk about the stories as if they were there in the situation in a story that took place before they were even born, because they've heard them tell that story about my mom or my dad. So not only does that reminiscing make you feel good about what wonderful times you shared with loved ones, it also becomes a multi-generational transfer of stories about your grandchildren's heritage, and for them to really know from whence they came. So I think that's a terrific suggestion. So do you have any other thoughts, particularly as people are not necessarily able to worship, for example, in the way that they normally would during the holidays? You know, many people, for example, go to church on Christmas Eve, on Christmas Day. Jewish people who are celebrating Hanukkah can celebrate in their home, but not at the temple, for example. So any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's when your faith tradition really boils itself down to what's the core of your faith tradition. And to pursue the kind of a relationship with your faith that's inside yourself. Yeah, I remember as a 12-year-old crunching through the snow to go to candlelight services on Christmas Eve. And I miss that. I really do miss that. But it's okay to keep that memory and go outside, take a candle with you in your front yard and with you and perhaps your family, and celebrate with yourself, by yourself, but with the core of your faith in place, wherever your faith base is. And also too, there are times, of course, when people of faith really begin to question either their own faith or, what is my understanding of God, and why are these things happening to me? And is there something wrong with me? Those are normal, natural responses. And a part of what I get to do, and really count this as a privilege, is give people permission to pursue those thoughts, because you can't work them out until you go through it. And almost all the time, when they're able to verbalize their thoughts and work it through, there's a transformation in the inner self. And usually that's from just being the possibility of exploring the greatness, the bigness of the God that you believe is there.
Yes, and actually, Donna Buffando, who's one of our terrific board members, just wrote, and I was going to suggest this, that somebody else suggested to me. Donna mentioned YouTube is a great source for religious services.
Mm.
And she said, I went to Easter Mass at the Vatican. And another friend of mine, I have not done this yet, said that she was looking up on YouTube for a great Christmas Eve service that had happened in the past that wouldn't be real time. Donna probably watched the Vatican service real time, but that you can even go and look on YouTube and find a video from a past Christmas Eve service or a past Christmas Day service that you could watch together with, your spouse or your children. So thank you, Donna, for mentioning that. I was thinking the same thing based on a friend of mine that did that. So, Charlie, how are you finding? Are you finding in the people that you're talking with that they're more depressed during the holidays? What are you thinking?
Yeah, just a heaviness. Yeah, some you might diagnose as a depression, but there's a heaviness. And the things that we try and do, Barbara and I try and do as we communicate, is to first of all remind them, as we've already said, that this isn't permanent, but that the ability to discuss and talk about that loved one really brings about an increased peacefulness. It's going to be a long time before there's peace, but managing the hurt through the ability to talk about your loved one really begins to change the atmosphere and change the conversation, and can bring a deeper sense of peace to that person's life.
And Charlie, how will you be celebrating the holidays this year?
Yeah, so it's just me and my sister, and I'll get up with her, and we'll probably have a meal together in their backyard in Beaufort. So that's pretty much what it'll be. My kids are scattered all over the place. I'll be talking with them or Zooming with them, but my sister and I will be together.
So my husband and I have got all these Zoom calls scheduled on Thanksgiving with friends that are single that we want to reach out to on the day to know that, reach out and touch. I was thinking if I could sing, I was thinking, that song, I think it was Diana Ross, reach out and touch someone you love. That seems like that's a great kind of phrase to be thinking about right now. Reach out and touch someone you love. And, Debbie shared thoughts earlier from someone who reached out who she hadn't talked to in years. And I've certainly had that happen to me recently. I started my job at a Catholic hospital in Chicago, and I worked for a nun, Sister Stella Louise, who was a force to be reckoned with. And she was the CEO of this hospital for 40 years.
Wow.
And a nurse that I worked with who lives in Arizona. Now, keep in mind, I worked with this woman over 40 years ago, tracked me down to let me know that Sister Stella Louise died at the age of 99. Mm-hmm. And Jan Kubisak and I were on the phone for an hour like we were best friends. And I was so touched that she thought enough to let me know that Sister Stella Louise had died, who was my boss like 43 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And so think of how great that makes you feel when someone you love reaches out and touches you. And that's the gift. That's better than a wrapped present, really, isn't it, Charlie?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a priceless conversation that can be had. And like you said, it costs nothing, lasts forever. That's a wonderful way to look at the way to reach out to other people.
Yes, so much. So Charlie, thank you very much. We're going to go back to Barbara for just a minute. And we appreciate you joining us today, Charlie. So Barbara, I understand you have something you'd like to add.
Yes, thank you, Janet. I just wanted to emphasize what Charlie said about, talking about your loved ones, because we do hear so often, they didn't even mention them. So we encourage people, and even during COVID, to really be open with your thoughts and feelings and to share. I want to talk about my loved one, or I don't want to. And that gives people permission to know where we're at. Because if you're fresh in grief, they're really wanting to follow your lead. And I think it's important as well during the pandemic to be able to share our thoughts and feelings. And then I just wanted to share a quick story because I think this is an awesome way when we're talking about humor. One of the members of our support group last year for Christmas bought himself presents. And of course, he bought things he wanted. He wrapped all the presents and he put them under the Christmas tree. And he said, they're for me, they're for my wife, but they're things I want. And I really enjoyed opening them. And I thought that was just really kind of a neat way to do that, to really, take care of yourself and continue with some of your old traditions while embracing new ones as well. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing that, Barbara. And you know what that reflects is the message that you've been given, Barbara, which is plan. Don't just let it sneak up on you. Plan for what you want to do for Thanksgiving. Plan for what you want to do for Christmas. And we haven't at all talked about New Year. That's another thing that's sacred to people oftentimes is, and we're going to really celebrate the end of 2020, I think, and
Right.
not want to do that alone. We all know. So I think if there's one overall message, it's really be thoughtful, be deliberate about how you celebrate the holidays. And so they don't sneak up on you and really overwhelm you in a way that's not constructive. So, Barbara, again, thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie for a few closing thoughts. And Debbie, by the way, happy Thanksgiving to you. Debbie, I just want to say that it's been really a pleasure working with you on all these webinars over the last 6 or 7 months, and we're grateful to do it. We'd love to hear from our audience if there's other topics that they would like us to cover. And so please chat those in or send those in as in the survey that you're going to reference. We meet, I want to repeat that we've told you this, but we meet after every webinar. So we'll be meeting at 11 o'clock this morning to reflect on how it went and what we would do better next time. And at this point, we don't have any other webinars scheduled, Debbie, but we'd be glad to schedule them like we did this in response to community need, because we see ourselves as serving the entire community of Hilton Head and Bluffton.
Janet, before you go, people, I know a lot of people couldn't attend some of the webinars. Can they attend? Can I ask you, can they go to the hospice website?
They can, and the website was mentioned in the chat. All you do is go to Hospice Care LC, that stands for Low Country, hospicecarelc.org. And the webinars are available. All the old ones are available. And you can, get a refresh on any of those. And not only that, if you see a webinar that you love, send that link to someone else. I've sent that link to people in Minnesota, to people in Ohio, on various topics. So please feel free to share those. We love to feel like we're impacting people in other parts of the country who need some tips.
And I think before you go, Janet, I think one of the things that I want to say again is I feel very grateful for being able to participate. But I think from all of the other board members and all of the people who have attended the webinar, you've done an amazing job as the facilitator. I think anecdotal stories, I think, here's what I always call it. I call you very user friendly, which means I think we can all relate to what you say. I mean, hospice care of the Low Country really does provide the gold standard. And I know that you're supposed to be off right now, but I think this is all of our opportunity to thank you for everything and to wish you and all of our viewers a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Thanksgiving, Happy New Year, and keep these webinars coming. I think we're very fortunate to have hospice care of the Low Country, you and all the board members. So I just want to thank all of you. I hope you all enjoyed today's webinar. Please, again, enjoy your holidays.